Over the past recent months, I've been having more of a fascination making videos into the relationship between musical albums and how they're connected to either prison life or true crime scenarios. And the fallout of doing so has led to loads of comments by you guys telling me all about these different albums relating to this topic. Which leads into today's video, as a handful of months back I got a comment by one of you guys telling me to check out this one-man Russian black metal project called Wolf's Source. Before I start talking about all the information connected to Wolf's Source and all the aftermath that came from it, there's a few stipulations I need to address. One being the fact that all the information provided about Wolf's Source is extremely limited, so I'm not really going off of that much. Add to the fact another hurdle to get over is that some of the information that you can find isn't really consistent, and I'll address that later on in this video. The other stipulation, which ties into the first one, is that I'm a US citizen trying to look up information about a Russian citizen who is in the Russian prison system. And I believe because of certain websites or Google searches, being a US citizen looking into anything to do with Russian websites, that's very, very restricted, which is quite the downer, because I remember back when I did the video all about Retaliation, which was a death metal band here in the United States, I could go on mass.gov, which, they were from Massachusetts, and look at all of their parole hearings, and that's how you can find out the information about them, as I had that advantage. As we're looking up the information about Wolf's Source with the individual behind it, there's nothing I can go off of from searching his name, criminal record. All of that is restricted to me. So again, a huge reason as to why that could be is because I'm looking at it from a totally different country with totally different networks. But as the story goes with Wolf's Source, it's a one-man Russian black metal project, all done by Alexander Tenchev, or as his nickname be preferred, Alexander Dancer Tenchev. He was sentenced to prison for 8 years for the conviction of murder at the penal colony in the Russian town of Khnuth. And, well, that's really it in terms of information provided online into Alexander's prison sentence. There's nothing documented as to when the exact date it was that he was incarcerated, nor does it specify his motivations for committing murder or who his victim was. The only bit of information that I personally can provide you are small speculations based off of the information presented here. For starters, it's stated that he served an 8-year prison sentence for the conviction of murder, and he served his sentence while doing Wolf's Source. Now, he ended Wolf's Source and immediately started up another project when he got out of prison, that being, I believe, pronounced Khnuth or Khnuth. And I state that because it puts a lot of emphasis on the hissing aspect of the pronunciation with no meaning behind it, so that's what I'm assuming is the correct way to pronounce it. But I bring this up because he started it as he got out of prison in the year of 2008, but the first release wouldn't come out until 2009. So doing the math there in terms of an 8-year prison sentence, it's safe to assume that Alexander was incarcerated between the years of either the year 2000 or 2001. The other bit of information that is provided is that it states that he served an 8-year sentence for the conviction of murder, which at face value really confused me. See, here in the United States, whenever I hear about an individual who committed murder, whether it be first degree, second degree, third degree, involuntary manslaughter, or voluntary manslaughter, bare minimum, the sentences start at 15 years and up. Although I had to remind myself that this criminal case is coming from Russian soil, so I got a bit of cultural shock, to say the least, reading that. From what I was able to find out online in terms of Russian law relating to that of the counts of murder, is that when an individual commits murder, they're facing a sentence between 6 to 15 years. Although, if the murder was committed in terms of motivation relating to either politically, racially, or religiously charged, they could face a sentence between 8 to 20 years. So while it's still a mystery as to why Alexander Tenchev committed murder, all I can say is, in terms of speculation from what is provided, it's more than likely not caused because of something that was political, racial, or religious. As for the project Wolf Source, it's not specified as to when the exact date was when this project started, but what we do know is that the first release came out in 2006 called Remission of Spirit, which was a promo release and everything was in English, limited to only 30 prints. Then a year later, in 2007, the same release would be put out again, this time under a label called Ridge of Dragon. The layout for these CDs doesn't really provide any context or information at all, other than inside the booklet it states, album created into the conditions of imprisonment. It's also worth mentioning, from reviews I've read online from either Uber Rock or No Clean Singing, is that the limited information of Alexander's biography is kind of consistent here with the notion of before he was imprisoned, he had no knowledge of black metal, and it wouldn't be a few years into his imprisonment where he would learn about black metal and have interest playing it. The exact date, person, or influences that Alexander discovered this style of music is still a mystery, but again, it does lead up as to how this album was made. Musically speaking, when it comes to discussing this album, I was pleasantly surprised by it in terms of quality and musicianship, because while it is nothing groundbreaking and it's not reinventing the wheel in any stretch of the imagination, if anything, it's just straightforward, raw, primitive, hateful and aggressive black metal that one would come to expect with the hordes upon hordes of black metal bands out there. For it to be recorded in a Russian prison, out of all places, and for it to still capture the spirit of a raw black metal album, it's pretty good. Granted, the programmed drums at first are quite obnoxious, considering the fact that the intro track is an instrumental. But as the guitarists start to kick in more as you proceed on into the album, and it's not just blast beats and it kind of gets shaken up a little bit with the programming of the drums, this album has some really just well-written yet primitive guitar riffs. It's nothing catchy or melodic, but it has that tremolo distortion throughout the album that really captures that primitive, hateful spirit that you would want in a black metal album. Vocals have that wretched snarl throughout it that, though it's nothing different from what you haven't heard of before, it's just executed very well. Other than two acoustic moments during the beginning and middle portion of this album, there's really not much else to talk about other than what could be influences and what this overall sounds like. For me personally, hearing the very overblown drum machines and thick, blistering guitar riffs and distortion, it reminds me quite a bit of something you would get out of like a Hate Forest album. In terms of influence, it's quite difficult to state what that is, as from what we know, Alexander had no knowledge or interest with black metal prior to being incarcerated. He gets incarcerated during the 2000s and wouldn't start Wolf's Source until at least the mid-2000s. So if I had to just go off of speculation as to who could have provided it to him, it being in Russia during this time period, my guess would be that maybe he found out about the Blazebirth Hall, a black metal group based out of Russia during this time that was gaining a bit of steam. So maybe he found out about Blazebirth Hall or other black metal classics out there. Again, it's impossible to say, but just judging off of the area and setting of all of this, my guess would be the Blazebirth Hall. When it comes to the credits in terms of the recording of this album, yes, Alexander Tenshift did everything from the instrumentation, vocals, lyrics, album artwork, producing. He did it all. But when it comes to where this album was recorded, yes, we know it's at a Russian prison, but which one exactly? Well, lucky for us, it's stated in the booklet. According to the Metal Archives in the CD booklet, the recording information states that it was recorded at these Russian letters that I don't know how to pronounce, 52, Forced Labor Camp of Strict Regime, on the eve of 2006. Searching up those Russian letters with the number 52, I get a picture of this prison, which I'm assuming this is the prison or its name and number where Alexander Tenchev recorded and did the album for Wolf Source. What I'd like to know is how Alexander had the ability to play black metal out of all genres in a Russian prison, otherwise known as I stated earlier, a penal colony, which if you look up the news sources as to what a penal colony is from its living conditions and ethics, it's literally on the same levels as the Gulag. From what I was able to find in terms of information as to how music is allowed among either the Gulag or the penal colony, which are basically the same thing when you look up how they're described, is that in an article done by Zeus all about music being played among these prisons, is that guards typically allow them to play music because it boosts their morale for them to work more efficiently in these work camps, basically, which is just really ironic when you consider the fact that Alexander Tenchev is making black metal, a very hateful form of music, and in their minds, at least to the guards, I guess, that this would be a morale boost for him to work more efficiently and be a morale boost among the prisoners. I just find that very ironic. While this may seem improbable for something like this to happen out of a Russian prison out of all places, it's not impossible. Because let me remind you, this isn't the first time I've covered an album made in a Russian prison. As back when I did my video all about albums made in prison, I talked about an individual named Vladimir Oda, who back in 1999, he released an album from a penal colony, which the conditions for him were identical to Alexander when he was doing Wolf Source. Getting back on track here, a year later in 2008, Alexander would release his final album that would be recorded in prison under the project's name of Wolf Source, that album called The Illusion of Freedom. In terms of music, this album really isn't that much different at all from the previous album. Regardless, I'll leave links provided to this album along with everything else I've talked about. But what I do find interesting about it is the name of the album, The Illusion of Freedom, as this would be released in 2008, the same time period where Alexander would be released from jail, making it almost seem as if the album title is like a reflection that these events will always haunt him. Now, as I stated way earlier on in this video, during 2008, Alexander Tenchev was released from prison and immediately started up his second project called Khnuth, which, according to the Metal Archives, with an interview that Alexander did for this webzine called Black Sun, is that there is no meaning behind this project's name other than he just wanted to put a lot of emphasis on the hissing aspect when you pronounce it, which it's a bummer that this was proclaimed in an interview for a webzine, and I couldn't find the Black Sun webzine anywhere or any information provided as to what else he might have said in this interview. So if anyone knows to where this is located or has it archived somewhere, definitely let me know. Being released from prison and now signed to a label called Nomos Day Productions, he was able to re-release his previous album, that being The Illusion of Freedom, onto his new project, which is literally the same thing, only now the production value is just a bit more beefed up. During the same year in 2009, he would release another album under the Khnuth project name, that being Beyond the Threshold of Visions. Once again, this isn't anything groundbreaking or different in the style of black metal, but I do feel like at this point he's found somewhat of a comfort zone when it comes to making music, at least in the style of black metal. As yes, it has all the cliches, but just done very well. And I feel like this is just more of his own personal interest continuing on with this project. Fast forward 2 years to 2011, and this is where we reach his final album he ever did, that being In the Seventh Circle of Hopelessness. This would be the biggest change up for Alexander in terms of his songwriting approach, as from just the album artwork, the name of it, and what you're about to hear, it's way more rooted in this emotive, despairing, and depressing sound that it starts to tiptoe within the realms of DSBM. Instrumentally speaking, it's in the same vein of albums that came before, only in terms of the overall tone. It really embraces more of that despairing and depressive sound that one would come to expect. And guitar riffs and overall songwriting is a bit more on the repetitive side to really drown you in that atmosphere all the more. As for the biggest change up, however, that would really go to the vocal performance on this album. It's not that snarling, wretched scream that's more on the aggressive side, again like previous works, but way more rooted in that agonizing, howling shriek that you would find from bands like, Make a Change, Blah Blah Yourself, and Abyssicate. Looking at the context of as to why this album is such a change up from previous works, I don't think it has to do with this new artistic direction, as it is more of a eulogy of Alexander expressing just really how broken he is mentally and health-wise as well. Because as I stated earlier on, this would be the final release that Alexander Tenshif would ever do, as it was stated in the year of 2011, the same year as this album was recorded, that Alexander would pass away due to a stroke. This is the part of the video where the information provided about Alexander Tenshif's death is not consistent. Because as I just stated, apparently he passed away in 2011 from a stroke. But according to Metal Archives, he passed away in the year 2016 from a stroke. And according to Danny, the owner to that of Go to Warwick's, who did a vinyl repress for the first album done by Wolf Source, is that Danny states that Alexander passed away from ending his own life. I want to try my best to be respectful with this part of the conversation and not really have any kind of argument or debate here. But if anyone has any other information provided as to what exactly happened, or they know for sure, definitely let me know in the comments. But I just wanted to state here, when it comes to that specific information, it's not really that consistent. I guess the last thing worth mentioning here in this video is with the Go to Warwick's vinyl repress that they put out. On the back portion of it, there's just a regular picture of Alexander Dancer Tenshif, which, how they were able to get this, I have no clue, but it's eerie just to see a normal picture of this individual, as this is only the third image you can find of the guy, and seeing him just be normal in what I'm assuming is either his house or apartment, it's quite eerie considering the actions that took place to lead him into prison and more than likely haunting him till his very end. And that'll do it for this video, guys. Like always, links provided to everything I talked about will be in the description below. Like always, if you have any other information you want to provide all about this topic, please let me know in the comments. And yeah, that is that. So like always, guys, make sure you guys drink plenty of water to stay hydrated, and have a great day.